Okay, good afternoon, friends and comrades. We'll start our roundtable discussion now. I hope the others can also uh, come soon. But I'd like first to say that the sponsoring organizations of this roundtable discussion are the following. Of course, our host is the UPCIDS Alternative Development Program. Then we have the Transnational Institute. We also have focus on the Global South, Stop the War Coalition, the Asia-Europe People's Forum, and the International Peace Bureau. A little bit probably of just to describe these different organizations. And I'll leave UP CIDS program later. But the Transnational Institute is a research advocacy think tank based in Europe, based in the Netherlands. And they promote uh, uh, what's this just, democratic, and sustainable world. So that's a whole lot, but they touch on many different issues. The focus on the Global South as well is a progressive think tank that takes on issues of trade, investment, corporate accountability, food sovereignty, and a lot of other issues that has also that are linked to questioning the neoliberal paradigm that has been adopted by most countries. And then we have the Stop the War Coalition, which is a multi-sectoral coalition of trade unions, social movements, women's organizations, rural peasant organizations, and a lot of other sectoral groups working, of course, to stop the war. Actually, the name Stop the War Coalition is the solidarity to oppose wars. Stop. Solidarity to Oppose Wars Coalition. So as the name goes, they're there to monitor all these conflicts that are happening in the world. But these concerns the Philippine-based groups who are concerned about the escalating tensions brought about by militarization, and the whole point is to stop, escalation to the point of war, arriving at a war situation. We also have the Asia Europe People's Forum, which links up the social movements, progressive movements from Europe and Asia. Again, looking at trade between these countries and all the impact of neoliberal policies, particularly on the developing countries. We have the International Peace Bureau, again, which is based in Europe, which is a long time peace organization that has won even I think the Nobel Prize at one point, that has concerned itself for decades on the issues of war and peace. So I'd like to get our host, the UPCIPS Alternative Development Program, to welcome us in the person of Dr. Dulce Natividad, who is a co-convener of this program. She, with the faculty of the Asian Center, former secretary of the college, and she got her PhD in medical anthropology and taught for about 3 years at Wellesley College before joining the UP faculty. So, Dulce, your welcome remarks, please.
Salamat, Princess, and good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Program on Alternative Development of the CIDS and our partners, the Transnational Institute, Focus on the Global South, Stop the War Coalition, Asia Europe People's Forum, and the International Peace Bureau, we would like to welcome you to our RTD on Europe and the Philippines in the service of the U.S. Empire. Maraming salamat for joining us in this important dialogue. The Program on Alternative Development of the UPCIDS aims to look at paradigms, policies, practices, and projects that are largely marginalized and excluded from the mainstream. As they challenge dominant modes, they do not figure prominently in the national and international discourse. AltDev aims to bring these alternatives out of the margins and into the mainstream so that they may be regarded on an equal footing with dominant discourses and thus offer alternatives to the existing system. And so, in keeping with this objective, we note that geopolitical developments and international relations are usually discussed from the point of view of states and government actors and experts. This time, in this RTD, we will highlight the voices and perspectives of social movements and communities. This timely roundtable discussion seeks to find ways to develop people-to-people diplomacy, increase participation of civil society in the realm of peace building, sharing and developing concepts of common security, diplomacy, and solidarity amongst movements. This RTD will also inform current situation of heightened militarization in Asia and the Pacific region, as could be deduced from the increase in military spending, the tensions in many areas, the increase in arms trade that all contribute to increase of foreign military footprints in the region, but also of NATO forces whose operations now include not only that of the traditional long-time military ally. This RTD seeks to bring together social movements, engaged scholars and researchers to look at alternatives to war and militarization strategies, such as people's dialogue, peace building that puts at the center the participation of peoples and sectors most affected through diplomacy, dialogue, and sharing skills in policy advocacy by sharing their programs and campaigns. We have invited 4 panelists, all leaders of social movements, to speak today. And we look forward to engaging with everyone. Magandang hapon ulit. Maraming salamat sa pagdalo.
Before we call on our speakers, I just want us to introduce ourselves to each other so that our speakers will also get to know us. So, start with
Parang quick introductions lang.
My name is Nonoy Hakbang. I am from the Philippines, but I live and work in Europe. And currently, I am involved also what we've been talking here or about to talk. I've been involved with especially with the migrants and refugee peoples in Europe. And in particular, in Europe, with the other migrant nationalities and also the people in Europe, we have formed a Europe-wide coalition of so-called transnational migrants platform in Europe. And just like all of us here, our purpose is not only to stop the war, but really at the same time building up the peace for a better life. Thank you.
My name is Ana Maria Nemenzo. I am the National Coordinator of Women Health and a member of Stop the War Coalition and many others.
Good afternoon. I'm Sylvia de la Paz. And I am an OBGYN. I'm a member of Health Action for Human Rights.
I'm Dolf Houtvast. I'm a educational trainer based in Holland since 1970, 50 years ago, involved in the Philippines, first as a volunteer for cooperative movement in and later in together with Hanek and others, starting the support group in Europe for the Philippines. Be involved in organization on CMW, the migrant rights seafarers working in Holland. And since 1970, in love.
My name is Hanneke. My story is more or less very similar to that from Dol, because I'm also already at fall in love with the Philippines 56 years ago. And we started to support the Philippines in all sorts of projects and organizations together. Now we are still doing that. Do it from the Netherlands.
I am Linda Tarupo. I am with Sterda and Kapatid that supports political prisoners. And I'm also with the
Tita De Quiros, former music teacher / development worker.
My name is Marvin Benaning. I'm a journalist.
Maribek Rakisa, I teach in NCPAG and also co-convener of Social Watch Philippines.
Magandang hapon. I'm Rene Raya, co-convener of Social Watch Philippines. And like Dolph Houtvast, since 1980, I have been in love with Europe.
I'm Irene from the Center for Migrant Advocacy.
I'm Fidel Namenzo. I'm professor of mathematics in UP Diliman, former chancellor of the university.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay, a youth volunteer of Fisher Folk Organization, Pangisda, Pilipinas.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aim Nurstan, member of Teatrong Bayan, Arts Theater.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yumi, part of Youth for Nationalism and Democracy, and also part of Teatrong Bayan.
Hi everyone, I am Jimmy, President of Youth for Nationalism and Democracy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ray. I am part of Youth for Nationalism and Democracy.
Gandang hapon po. Ako po si G, also part from Youth for Nationalism and Democracy.
Good afternoon, I'm Ricky. I'm student of European Language here in Department of European Language. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eunice. I'm from AltDev.
Hello, good afternoon po. Arvin po from AltDev din. Salamat.
Is the mic really working? Can we hear each one? Okay. So now I'd like to introduce the first speaker. And this is Joanna Janier. We call her DJ. Okay. And she heads the Secretariat of the Stop the War Coalition. And she's a graduate of UP Manila and has a long experience in people's advocacy on demilitarization, the nuclearization, and for peace. Okay. Jay, I'll introduce each speaker just before they talk.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Tita Princess. I prepared a few slides to guide our my short, and I promise it will be short presentation at this point. So good afternoon. I speak today on behalf of the Stop the War Coalition Philippines and in solidarity with all those who believe in that peace is not the absence of war, it is the presence of justice, sovereignty, and dignity. This year, the Philippines hosted the largest military exercises in its history. Balikatan 2025 last April with 17,000 Filipino and US troops. In July, Salaknib, which is Ilocano for shield, evolved from a training drill last 2019 into a full-scale rehearsal of war. And just weeks ago, for the first time, Filipino troops joined Talisman Sabre in Australia, an exercise led by the US and Australia designed for high-intensity conflict. These are not isolated events. These are part of a dangerous descent into a US-driven arms race. What is the cost? Diverted public funds, militarized communities, and transformation of our islands into a launchpad for foreign wars. Next slide, please. According to the Stockholm Institute for Peace Research, the 2025 reports test that global military spending has reached 2.44 trillion. The Indo-Pacific is now the epicenter of this build-up. Of the 1,247 foreign military bases worldwide, 877 belong to the United States. As you can see from the photo, I couldn't actually take a photo of the whole 877 bases because it's a moving graphic, but I figured you'd get the point. So all those little dots, those are US bases. So the US remains the world's top military spender, and the Philippines is being weaponized as a pawn in its strategy. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's vow to militarize the Indo-Pacific is not rhetoric. It's a roadmap, and our government is following it. This year, the Philippine defense budget soared to 382 billion pesos. Meanwhile, our education faces a 50 billion shortfall. 1 in 3 Filipinos cannot afford medical care, and climate adaptation receives less than 1% of the national budget. This is not national defense, it is national neglect. Next slide, please. The US pursues a dual-track strategy in the Indo-Pacific. Military containment of China, as you can see from the photo, as I said, all those little dots, you would see, this is from the World Beyond War research. So they reflect that there are 12 US bases. So turning the Philippines to a forward base, as we know from past news, we have the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the US and the Philippines, which only reflects 9 sites. And now all that 12 sites, so there are like extra 3, are now able to host not just US forces, but US allies. So it includes airfields in Cagayan, Isabela, which are positioned as a flashpoint in the future war, naval bases near the West Philippine Sea, which escalate tensions with China. As you can tell from the graphic, they're all positioned towards South China Sea rather than the other side, towards the Pacific. And under Trump, we see a new phenomenon, militarization of trade. Economic deals are now payment for base access. Trump himself said, this is part of a wider pact. And Marcos Jr. confirmed that we agreed to buy more US products. What does this mean? EDCA deployment disguised as peacekeeping, increased arms purchases from US firms, which are sidelining Filipino defense capabilities, and military aid tied to the Luzon Economic Corridor, which runs from Subic, Manila, and Batangas. Infrastructure with dual use potential such as railways and ports that serve both trade and war. Please note so that we have EDCA 9 sites, there is a proposal for a Subic Bay Ammunition Depot. That was confirmed that the negotiations have been going on since last year. So that's why it is in asterisk. And there was also news about a refueling facility in Davao capable of supplying 40 million gallons annually, and a ship maintenance hub in Oyster Bay, Palawan. So all three, which are still forthcoming. So if we add that to the 12, which has been monitored by World Beyond War, that's going to be 15 if my math is correct. So as we know, the presence of which violates the 1991 Senate rejection of the US bases and the Philippines Constitution. Next slide. Right. Oops. And next. Sorry, this is the old one. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it threatens nearby communities with toxic perfluoroalkali and polyfluoroalkali substances or PFAS, which we know are present in US munitions. And it undermines our own government arsenal. We actually have a government arsenal in Bataan. It contradicts the recently passed Self-Reliance Defense Posture Act, which is framed as supposed to be strengthening our defense and sovereignty. And also, we are in danger of allowing small modular nuclear reactors, which is the nuclear energy is supported by our government, that are planned near EDCA sites like Palawan and in northern Luzon. Can you go back to the previous? Yeah, one more. Yeah, thanks. So the second is economic capture. Yeah, so Marcos Jr., so the takeoff here is the recent tariffs. So Marcos Jr. accepted a 19% US tariff in Philippine exports. We know that from the news, and in exchange for tariff-free entry of auto, soy, wheat, and medicines, which of course we know will impact our local producers and exposes us to economic coercion. This framework allows the US to demand more EDCA sites, more arms purchases, and more strategic concessions under the threat of tariff hikes. This is not partnership, this is subordination. Mandatory imports undercut our food and health security, tariff eliminations sabotage our local industry, especially defense-linked sectors. And export instability threatens our jobs and fuels displacement. The US was previously pledged 60 million in foreign aid and 21 billion in investments, mostly in the semiconductor and energy and infrastructure. But we know that these are not gifts. These are inducements for loyalty. So the Luzon Economic Corridor, Subic, Clark, and Batangas is being effectively militarized. Ports and railways risk becoming war logistic hubs. Our infrastructure is being embedded in the US regional strategy. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So history teaches us wars begin with lies. But if war erupts in our waters, it is our homes, our fishers, our families who will suffer. Earlier today, there was a press conference saying where Marcos was quoted that if war breaks out in Taiwan, the Philippines will be dragged into it, kicking and scraping, whether we like it or not. He could have said that we would not do anything to escalate the tensions. But what he did say was, what do you want us to do? Are we just going to sit back? He could have said, we will refuse to send our troops because this is not our war. But that wasn't his statement. His statement was, what are there is no Filipino who would want war. And we are just doing what we can to protect our citizens. But unfortunately, that framework is hinged in and embedded into the US war machinery. That's the big problem here. So this is not peace. We are part of imperial chess with Asian lives as pawns. Therefore, we demand that we refuse to be dragged into a US-China war. We asked our government to declare neutrality now. Do not allow our land, ports, and airspace to be used for war, which unfortunately, as you've seen from the maps, it is. Reaffirm diplomacy and regional cooperation and the sovereignty of our peoples. Because we know that peace is not passive. Peace is the decision. Peace is a struggle, a fight for survival, dignity, and a future of our children. Thus, we say no to the new arms race, divest from militarization, reallocate funds for education, healthcare, and climate resilience, which will be true national security. That will be the true essence of national security. Reject all foreign military bases, close the EDCA sites, and no to proxy wars. Yes to peace and climate justice, invest in the green jobs, and protect our indigenous environmental defenders, and militarization and repression. So in the end, I would like to say, next slide, let us choose peace, let us fight for sovereignty, let us reclaim our future. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joseph Purugganan, who heads the Philippine Office of Focus on the Global South. He also is the coordinator of the Trade Justice Philippines and has long experience in all these neoliberal issues and all the protests and resistance movements to counter neoliberal policies. So, Joseph.
Thank you, Princess. Magandang hapon po. Good afternoon, everyone. My presentation would expound on what a point that DJ made about how the nexus of trade and security and militarism. And it's not new, but we've seen it, I think, more explicit these days. And if I think everyone is aware of the recent agreement signed by the Marcos administration with Trump it's a trade deal, no? If you very quickly go back, no, April 2, Trump announced in what he called Liberation Day, tariffs on around 52 countries. Liberation Day tariffs for the Philippines were pegged at 34% initially in Liberation Day. And then it was brought down to 20. Now the Philippine government received a letter from Trump saying that Liberation Day tariffs were paused for 90 days. The suspension ended in July 9. And then a letter was received by the government saying that the Philippines would now be imposed a 20% tariff on all goods. But there's an annex of exempted products, which include, among others, semiconductor products. And then when the 20% tariffs were announced, the government scrambled and immediately a team went to the United States to negotiate. And they said they were successful. They brought it down from 20 to 19. So a 1% reduction in the tariffs in the US. But the key question there is at what cost? And I think DJ already hinted to the aspects of the deal that actually go beyond trade. While we do not have the details yet, the full details of the agreement, what we have are press statements from Trump. What we know are the following. As I said, the Philippines will impose a 19% tariff on all Philippine products. This is a 1% decrease from the earlier 20%, but 2% higher than the 17% imposed. Sorry, I'm mistaken earlier. It was 17 on Liberation Day, increased to 20 in July, and then decreased to 19. No? So on the part of the Philippines, it has headed to lowering to as low as 0 tariffs on, among other things, automobiles, auto parts, imports from the US. Marcos also announced to the press that the Philippines has agreed to buy more products from the United States and an increased importation from the US for soy products, wheat products, and medicine. Aside from trade, and this is a key point in this discussion, wider concessions were also made. Trump wrote on his social media that the new tariff was part of a wider pact in which the Philippines would remove duties on US goods and the two countries would cooperate militarily. So very clearly, it was projected as a trade agreement, but very clearly there are military issues attached to that agreement. Actually, that agreement is born out of an executive order issued by Trump. The long title of that, it's Executive Order 14257, entitled Regulating Imports with Reciprocal Tariff to Rectify Trade Practices that Contribute to Large and Persistent Annual United States Good Trade Deficit. So if you read that executive order, it's Trump, the US government, complaining that the existing trade regime has not benefited the United States. It's as if they've now become victims of a regime that they themselves pushed many years ago. So they complain, and they in fact invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the National Emergencies Act to issue this executive order. I think that's a different presentation. Mali. Yan ba? Wait. Dali lang po akin.
Okay. Yeah. While we're waiting, you can take your some snacks from the side table, and you can bring them over to the table as well.
Sorry.
By the way, this roundtable discussion is really a face-to-face meeting. we have not provided for an online Zoom participation, but it's being recorded and will be shown, I think later on after the roundtable discussion, it will be probably uploaded on YouTube. So other people from other countries will also have access to the discussion here. So it's back to trying to be normal again for activities like this. Of course, this was all disrupted when we had the pandemic, and we were all used to having Zoom, online meetings, but we feel that it's nice to know and to see, and to talk to the participants face to face. So we're trying to go back to this normal method, but we know it can never be completely normal. Okay, so but for now, we've chosen this to be a face-to-face meeting.
Okay. So yeah. Apologize for the delay. No, it was a different.
Yeah, we've asked them to take some snacks that they can bring back to the table. Yeah.
But
So we'll resume our roundtable discussion with Joseph Purugganan.
yeah, thanks, Princess. So as I was saying, and if you can go forward to the next slide. Oh, yeah, the slide before. So this is Executive Order 14257 issued by Trump. There's key points to consider here. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the National Emergency Act to issue this executive order. And he complains about the large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficit, which for him constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and economy of the United States. So very clearly, you can see that the framing of these so-called reciprocal tariffs from Trump is already in the context of a national security threat, no, on the part of the United States. And the weapon that is being used is the use of tariffs and attacking non-tariff barriers, which could include domestic economic policies and practices like currency and value-added tax. In the executive order, it's also clear. Next slide, please. Two key issues that were also mentioned that the United States feel vulnerable or threatened by the current sort of geopolitical situation or economic situation is how the supply chains of critical supply chains have been undermined. Executive order cites, for example, COVID, the experience under COVID-19, where United States, the dependence of the United States to even other were exposed, no, because of their dependence on other countries for the supply of these products. Aside from critical supply chains, the executive order also highlights that the situation has rendered U.S. defense industrial base dependent on foreign adversaries. So that it goes into a discussion of how, because the United States manufactures, in fact, many of these weapons and exports these weapons, that their own, next slide, their own stockpiles have been depleted. So there's now a move. So when the underlying sort of motivation for Trump in imposing the tariff walls is to bring back manufacturing to the United States, he's not just talking about manufacturing of goods, but manufacturing of weapons as well, to increase their capacity to also retain many of their weapons for their own defense. So when you talk of manufacturing capacity and defense capability, for example, yeah, it talks about automobile, shipbuilding, pharmaceuticals, metals, but also saying that it's also critical manufacturing capacity in the defense industrial sector. So that, in the words of Trump, to protect American interests at home and abroad. The EU also highlights 3 military and security concerns. Next slide. Next. One, I was mentioning a while ago already that for the longest time, military equipment, and that has depleted their stockpile according to the EO. Second, US defense companies must now develop new advanced manufacturing technologies across a range of critical sectors, including biomanufacturing, batteries, and microelectronics. And then third, the EU is to maintain an effective security umbrella to defend its citizens and homeland, as well as for its allies and partners. It needs to have a large upstream manufacturing and goods producing ecosystem to manufacture these products without undue on imports for key inputs. So that is where the United States is coming from. That it's because the current economic policy that it has also in trade and economic policies that it has been pushing for 30 years or so has beaten them back. And now they're saying that because of that, has put the United States in a weakened position. Particularly if you look at manufacturing in terms of global value chains, where a lot of the raw materials needed for manufacturing are not in the hands of the United States, but primarily in the hands of its primary rival, China. So we're talking here, and we will talk about it later, no, on the issue of mineral that are necessary among others, electric vehicles manufacturing, for example. So that between Marcos and from Malacanang, next successful to 19. To say that actually the 19% tariffs we will not be the ones to pay, because the Americans will actually pay for higher the lowest in Southeast Asia. Sabi nila, except for Singapore, which was slapped a 10% tariff, we're the second lowest already next to Singapore. And that, according to Malacanang, the sensitive agricultural products remain protected. And as far as the automotive industry is concerned, the response of Malacanang is that in Tagalog, alam naman nating hindi tayo gumagawa ng kotse. We all know that we are not manufacturing cars. But we do have cars manufactured, a local manufacturing, the government has a policy to develop cars manufacturing. I suppose this already now will now be sidelined because of this zero tariff policy. And then subsequently, a report from DTI next, to which is sort of giving instructions to the department on the details of the agreement. So we get bits and pieces of the agreement through various sources. I just want to highlight the aspect on energy. So this is what we considered as far as energy is concerned. The Philippines will also increase importation of LNG, liquefied natural gas, and ethanol from the United States. The Philippines will facilitate U.S. companies' application and award of exploration rights in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines will facilitate investment opportunities for U.S. companies in oil and gas exploration, as well as geothermal development. The Philippines will investments of US companies to build and operate the LNG reception regasification storage complex in Subic area. And on will offer repellent and copper. So this is, his art of the deal sort of powers, no, because of his imposition of tariffs, it seems, or he likes to project that many countries have now lined up to secure such deals, no, and a number of Southeast Asian countries have in fact entered into such deals. So Vietnam, Indonesia, among others. And there's a thinking that the logic in why these countries are making such concessions is that there seems to be a longer strategic interest that they are considering. The interest of preserving the relationship with the United States, no? Especially if you suspect that the terms may change again in the future anyway. So they're making a they're thinking that, it's okay to negotiate with Trump to bring down some tariffs, to concede some tariffs, because there's a wider agenda that has to be preserved, and that is the US-Philippine relations. But this is not, we're not just talking of the United States, and I think that this forum also touches on the European Union and what role does the European Union play in this shifting geopolitical. Next. Yeah, in this, the geopolitical and the great power rivalries that we are seeing now, no. Here, I just want to highlight two issues. One is the scramble for critical minerals. As I said, no, there's now a race for these critical minerals among the different superpowers, no. United States on the one hand, you have the European Union, and you have China. Next slide. Next. If you look at this very small slide, this shows the vulnerability of the United States and the European Union with respect to the access to critical minerals. So these are the largest producers and users of selected critical minerals in the energy transition. So it looks at the value chain from mining, processing, battery material, battery cell pack, up to the deployment of electric vehicles. So across the supply chain, you see that, of course, the source of raw material would be at the beginning, not the mining stage. And you don't see the United States in the early stages of the supply chain, which means that they enter into the battery production stage of the supply chain. But in order for them to produce the batteries necessary for the electric vehicles that they manufacture, they need the critical raw materials. Without the critical raw materials, they cannot produce the batteries. Unfortunately for the United States, these critical raw materials are sourced. Many of them are located in China, are sourced in China. So that has really exposed the vulnerability of the United States. This competition between the US and China and the EU to some extent to access and control those critical minerals. And that is also where the Philippines is drawn into this sort of great power rivalries, because we're one of the biggest sources of these critical raw materials. Another aspect that I want to highlight in these geopolitical shifts is this question of another race that is happening globally, and this is the race for artificial intelligence, the AI race, no? The Carnegie Endowment has described this situation as great power rivalry and the weaponization of interdependence, no? A big motivating factor in this shifting geopolitical dynamics continues to be the question of how to counteract the increasing power and influence of China. A big part of the global economic strategies of both the United States and EU is challenging China's dominance i.e. its massive Belt and Road Initiative, its inroads into Asia and the Pacific through agreements like RCEP, its control over critical raw materials. Aside from China's access and control over these materials, its dual-use strategy, I think mentioned by DJ also, of utilizing technologies for both commercial and military purposes constitute a threat to Western economies. On critical raw materials, for example, we see China's dominance and the US and EU's vulnerability. China is the world's largest producer of lithium batteries for electric mobility and commands a 60% share of the global EV market. It dominates mining, metallurgy, and material science sectors, often referred to as 3Ms, much of the world's clean tech supply chains. In contrast to China, the European Union and the United States are heavily dependent on imports of critical raw materials from abroad and thus on international commodity markets and access to foreign mines. The objective of securing supply chains and defending strategic interests over critical raw materials, energy, and technologies underpins the trade and security nexus. On artificial intelligence, for example, it is at the center of efforts to advance the digital transformation of the global economy. It has become such a critical component of how big economies like the United States, the EU, and China are framing the global economy, that it has inevitably been framed as a security issue. And again, we see in this sector the crucial interplay of trade, technology, and security issues. Both the US and EU have well-defined policies to regulate the use and trade of semiconductor technologies, for example, and applications, which are key drivers of the AI revolution. These policies are designed to achieve two goals: bolster the competitive advantage of companies within the EU and the United States to develop and export these technologies, which includes addressing supply chain barriers and second, to prevent access to these technologies to other countries, particularly China. So US-China containment plans and what role has the Philippines played will continue to play forward. Basing military exercises, the DJ also said, are part of this sort of interplay and dynamics that mixes technology, trade, and militarism. This is the idea of economic statecraft, the concept that states using economic tools like trade agreements in order to advance foreign policy goals. As I said, this is not just about the United States, this is the European Union as well next. The European Union has its own Indo-Pacific strategy. So a lot of focus is on this region called Indo-Pacific region. For example, in the EU, next slide, EU strategic interests. These are the 7 priority areas of the EU in the Indo-Pacific area. Priority areas of sustainable and inclusive prosperity, entering partnership agreements and FTAs, green transition, ocean governance, digital governance, connectivity, security and defense, and human security. The EU has pushed for various programs with the Philippines in order to advance these areas. And of course, we are in the process of, we are negotiating with the European Union for a similar trade agreement, an EU-Philippines trade agreement, which is already now in its 3rd round, entering into the 4th round of negotiations. On the aspect of defense, security and defense, next slide. So we have this document called the European Defense Industrial Strategy that actually, given the context that I just discussed, the EU is, of course, does not want to be left behind. And it also wants to position itself as a strong proponent of and building its own capacity on security and defense. So they have developed this industrial strategy on defense, which means calling for more defense spending, more support for companies engaged in the manufacture of military equipments. Maybe, and I think Brid and Niamh can can further expound, no, on the EU agenda. So just to end, no, unfortunately, this geopolitical mess in at least two ways. One, we are a component, we are a cog at the end of this many supply chains that are very important to both US and EU manufacturing. So whether we're talking about critical minerals, no, we have nickel, lithium, cobalt, copper, no. These critical minerals are essential down the line, no, of the supply chains. So we are drawn into this because we are a supplier of these critical minerals. Second, we are entangled because the government enters into agreements with both the US and the EU, whether these are, free trade agreements or critical mineral agreements. The EU-Philippines FTA, for example, two new elements stand out there. There's a energy and raw materials chapter in the agreement, and then there's also a digital trade chapter. So both these new elements are reflective of the priorities, the strategic priorities of the big superpowers. And then finally, just want to end next by maybe highlighting or raising a few more questions for us to consider in the discussion as we reflect on alternative pathways. So this year is the 30th anniversary of my organization focused on the Global South. And so we think that it's a good opportunity to reflect on not just past struggles, but looking at where we are now and how do we move people's struggles forward given the complex issues. But this year is also the 70th anniversary of the Bandung Conference. I don't know if people remember the Bandung Conference. No? It was a gathering held in the Indonesian city of Bandung in 1955, which is an unprecedented coming together of brown people of African and Asian states emerging out of the anti-colonial struggles. Bandung, we feel, offers an opportunity to reflect on the issues of neutrality that DJ was saying, new colonialism, and non-alignment, no, in the face of this global power dynamics. And more importantly, on the role of people's movements in challenging and advancing alternatives to the global order. So I just want to end by pointing to some key questions that we hope we can ponder upon. No? One is, what are the pathways and entry points of rethinking international, national, financial, economic governance for countries in the South, so that we are able to be free of debt traps and redirect financial resources towards ensuring essential services, social protection, social well-being for people. Second, what new strategies should people's movements forge to counter this multi-stakeholderism in global governance? Does the emergence of forums like BRICS, for example, signal possibilities for new frameworks? Third, with the very real threat of conflicts breaking out in the Western Pacific and other regions in Asia, how can movements push governments to resolve differences through negotiations while at the same time contributing to strengthening cross-border links among peace organizations in South Asia and the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan, countries that host hundreds of US military installations and that support Washington's aggressive strategies of containing China? And then finally, how can we contribute to the strengthening of efforts of people's movements for decolonization and ending military and economic occupations? So I hope we can, in the discussion, think about some of these strategic questions, because I think, what is happening geopolitically is really a challenge for a small country like the Philippines, especially so if the government seems to be, its default position is to align to either one of these two superpowers rather than advance an independent foreign policy. Thank you.
with the first two speakers. They have laid the ground, the situation that the Philippines faces at this time. It doesn't look so good for the Philippines, especially when we think that we're still within the clutches of U.S. Imperialist domination. No? So I think this is a challenge for all of us to think through. But now we would like to hear from our partners, our friends and comrades from Europe. And we will start with Niamh. I will not venture to mention or to pronounce her name. She is Irish, so it's a very difficult way to pronounce Irish names. But so for short, it's Niamh. Actually, that's how Niamh is pronounced Niamh. Okay. So Niamh is with the Transnational Institute. She is the coordinator of the War and Pacification program of the Institute. And this program focuses on the permanent state of war. Naku. So war is not just an incident or an event, but the permanent state of war that is happening now in Europe and all over the world, and the pacification of resistance. Niamh holds masters in the international human rights law from the Irish Center for Human Rights at the National University of Ireland, Galway. Is that different from National University of Ireland? But this says Galway as well. Okay. Well, anyway, let's hear from Niamh, who's just here on a visit, but she's leaving soon. So we took advantage of her presence in the Philippines to hear, and to learn about Europe, the situation. So we'd like to listen to Niamh now.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak. I came to the Philippines actually for Brid and Nonoy's 40th wedding anniversary, but it's a great opportunity to actually connect with people here in the Philippines, because there's a lot of what DJ and Joseph have mentioned that we're seeing. It's kind of similar patterns taking place in Europe, albeit with a different background, I think. So we'll probably delve into a little bit of that in the next few minutes. I don't have a PowerPoint. I've just made out some notes, so I'll refer to my notes, making some key points along the way, and then hopefully in the discussion we can get deeper into the content. Maybe just to say, I started at the Transnational Institute 7.5 years ago, and I had just moved back to Europe from having spent 7 years living in Latin America. And I could never have imagined actually that the European Union was the militarized union that it is, and the war machine that it is. I had actually, even as a European, I had no idea about just how deeply embedded the war machine is in European policy, and it has actually gotten much worse in the last 7 years that I've been working at TNI. So maybe just to start by saying the European Union still describes itself as a peace project. I don't know if anyone here in this room believes that it is, but it still describes itself as a peace project. The Union itself evolved out of the ashes of World War II, and the idea was that when the European Union formed all those years ago, that it would be a union that would basically promote peace. This was what they set out, that they would make war not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible. This was what they set out in the Schuman Declaration, that it would be materially impossible to have another war. In fact, actually, what we see now is that the European Union is one of the main contributors to wars all around the world. So what began as an economic and a political union has evolved over the last number of decades into a fully fledged military union that is operating, and this is a direct quote from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, it is operating as, quote, one union, one alliance, united in purpose with NATO. So the European Union and NATO are two sides of the same coin. There is basically no difference between the two. Of the European Union's 27 member states, 4 of them are not NATO members. To mention the 4, Ireland is not a member of NATO, but it has a partnership with NATO. Austria is not a member of NATO. It's now hoping to become one. Actually, they're starting discussions on this. Cyprus is not a member of NATO, but it hosts British military bases. And from those bases, Britain flies surveillance flights to Israel to accompany it in its perpetration of a genocide in Gaza. And Malta is also not a member of NATO. But there's basically no difference in policy and practice between the European Union and NATO. The European Union, as I said, started off as a political and economic union. It has evolved legally and politically into a military union. So maybe to set out legally under the Nice Treaty, which came into effect in 2003, that really set the groundwork for setting out a common security and defense policy that came about in 2003. Then there was an attempt to build a European constitution that would be put to the people of Europe to create what would effectively be a constitution of European Union states. That was rejected. This constitution was rejected in public votes by the people in France and the people in the Netherlands. And so the European Union, instead of saying, well, hold on, the people in 2 of the most populous countries in Europe have rejected this proposal, we should shelve it. What they did was they adopted a period of reflection. That's a quote, a period of reflection. They basically put the constitution on ice for a few years, and then they rolled out this constitution again in the form of a treaty, which was called the Treaty of Lisbon. This time it was not going to be put to the people. It would simply be enacted without putting it to anybody in Europe. In Ireland, we did have to vote on it because of domestic law in Ireland. But actually then when the Lisbon Treaty was eventually enacted, it was enacted almost in the same form as the constitution that had been rejected a number of years earlier by 2 of Europe's most populous countries. So Europe is undemocratic by design. It has been written into the European legal system that it is undemocratic by design. And so we have now 3 main European institutions. We have the European Council. Nobody in Europe elects anyone to European Council. The European Council is made up of the heads of government or the heads of state, depending on how the states operate. So the European Council is made up of 27 heads of government. None of them are elected by the people of Europe. The European Commission is made up of a college of commissioners. None of them are elected. And all power in the European Union is concentrated within the European Council. That's where the political power lies. The economic power lies within the European Commission. They're the ones that are doing the trade negotiations, like Joseph mentioned, for example. And where we do actually elect people in Europe, we do elect members of the European Parliament, they have actually got no power. The European Parliament is a talking shop. They have absolutely no power. They cannot initiate legislation. Legislation can only begin in the European Commission. And as I just said, European commissioners are not elected. So we have basically built in Europe a structure that is undemocratic by design and where power is concentrated in the hands of very few unelected officials. And of that power and of those officials, it's mostly Germany actually that holds sway. So the European Commission is led, as most of you know, by Ursula von der Leyen, a German woman, who has basically become the face of Europe's unwavering support for Israel's genocide in Gaza. On the watches of the European institutions over the last decade, we've seen an unprecedented European Union militarization project. Now, again, the European Union is making a laughingstock even of its own legislation, because the European legislation actually sets It is not permissible under EU law to spend the EU's public budget on anything for military end. So you cannot spend EU public money on militarism. So then you're all looking at me thinking, well, hold on a second, does the EU not spend billions on military? It does, in fact. So the EU is really in breach of its own laws. The way that it can do this is it said, well, hold on, this is not for defense or military purposes. This is for industrial purposes. So what we're doing is funding not the production of weapons, but the capacity to produce weapons, which apparently, according to the EU, is vastly different to fund the capacity to produce as opposed to the actual production of weapons. And so now we have tens of billions, and soon it will be hundreds of billions of European public budget being spent on something that European Union law says we cannot spend it on. So this is an indication of the European Union. Maybe just to mention some of the EU military structures to give you an idea of what it looks like in practice. We have a European Border Patrol Service. It's called Frontex. Brid will talk a bit more about the border industrial complex and you know the rollout of the European Union's border regime and how there's basically been a war on migrants for decades, actually, and it's been getting increasingly worse and worse. And we see European Union policy, which has been designed to allow people to die in the Mediterranean. These are surplus populations, and it has been calculated by the European Union that it is fine to allow these people to die in the Mediterranean Sea, to die as they're crossing the Sahel, as a result, direct result of the European Union's policies. If they don't die, then they're likely to end up in Libyan concentration camps that are funded by the European Union, or they're likely to be pulled back, if they don't die in the Mediterranean Sea, to be pulled back to Libya by the Libyan Coast Guard, which is also funded by the European Union. So we have a European Union that is actively in bringing about policies designed to kill people on the move towards Europe. Many of these people are on the move towards Europe because they're coming from countries that are being bombed by European weaponry. So, for example, if they're on the move from Sudan, we have, going back decades, European funding going to the Janjaweed and going to Darfur, which brought about a genocide in Sudan, in Darfur. We have just today, I was looking at an example from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the M23 rebels from Rwanda have killed 300 people in the last number of weeks. The M23 rebels, alongside the Rwandan state security forces, have also been funded by the European Union. So you have military policies from the European Union which are allowing the export of arms from the European Union to countries where they are then being used to perpetrate war and genocide. Of the weapons being sent to Israel to perpetrate a genocide, most people think, well, the United States is the main producer of weapons, and it is, but Germany is the second biggest supplier of weapons to Israel. About 30% of Israeli weapons are from Germany. And then of the US weapons, which are about 60%, of those weapons, most of them will contain components from Europe. So often components will go from the EU states under military licenses that are being issued under EU law. So the EU law is actually responsible for the licenses. Those weapons will be sent from the EU to the US, where they're fitted into weapons. They will then be flown through European airspace as they are sent back to Israel and used to perpetrate a genocide. And as we sit here right now, we know that Israel is perpetrating a militarized occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. There are over 2 million people right now, as we sit here drinking water, eating snacks, having coffee. There are people being forcibly starved to death under a military occupation that our countries are complicit in supporting. We awoke this morning to the news that 5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed last night in their press tent outside Al Shifa Hospital. Now, that was a drone strike directly targeting 5 journalists and killing them. that drone was likely made either in the US, in Europe, was fitted out with European components. We have, for example, Joseph mentioned the artificial intelligence and weaponry. The European Union has a European Defence Fund, which is involved with the research and innovation of weaponry. Of the projects that are going through this European Defence Fund, there are a number of them that rely on the use of artificial intelligence in weaponry. Now, we've looked at some of these. There is no evidence that there's any ethical or legal checks done to support this development of weaponry. I mean, this is weaponry which is designed to kill. It is designed to kill people. We've already seen in Gaza the reality of an AI, a digitalized war. Digitalized warfare is what we're seeing right now in Gaza. And the European Union is giving billions of public money to roll out the research and innovation of AI in weaponry. So this is the future of warfare, is what we're seeing now in Gaza. And if we think what's happening in Gaza is going to stay in Gaza and end there, we have another thing coming to us. Maybe just to mention in getting into kind of the US empire side of things, in March of this year, the European published a Reperti white paper. So this was a plan setting out what the European Union is going to do between now and 2030 in terms of defence. It has allocated 800 billion euros for this Defence Readiness 2030 plan. Now, in it, it says, and this is a direct quote, the US demands that Europe take more responsibility for its own defence. So we are responding to a demand from the United States. So there is no difference. I think that's really important to say. There is no difference between EU policy in terms of defence and security, or whatever they want to call it. It's a war plan. It's a war policy. There is no difference between the EU strategy and the US strategy. They're two sides of the same coins, and they're aligned. And maybe just to mention, because DJ, you put out some very interesting details on the US bases here in the Philippines. In Europe, we have 40 US bases dotted around the around Europe. But even more than that, I mean, I'm from Ireland, and in Ireland we don't have any formal US military bases. We're supposedly a neutral country, though our government would like to make us otherwise. But we have Shannon Airport, which is a civilian airport, but it has been used by the US military for decades. So I would say that even beyond the 40 US military bases that we know of, there are other places that are being used regularly by the US, and they have become de facto military bases. There's 84,000 US service personnel based in the European Union. 84,000 US personnel, service personnel. There are 600 nuclear warheads in Europe. 600 nuclear warheads in Europe. Of those, some of them are owned by France and the UK, but the US has also stationed a number of its own nuclear warheads in Europe. I live in the Netherlands, and there are US-owned nuclear warheads about 90 kilometers from where I live. There's also nuclear warheads in Italy, in Belgium, and in Germany. So the EU is a tool of US empire, but it's actively so. And also because the European Union has formerly been, European states have formerly been colonizing states. They continue to be colonizing states, imperialist states. And so we're basically on a suicide mission within the European Union by aligning ourselves to the US, because if tomorrow the US wants to hang us out to dry, it will do so. There is no friendship. It's all about interests. So the day that the European Union stops being a strategic partner with interests for the United States, you know, it can hang us out to dry. Maybe just on the final point, because we mentioned neutrality. In Ireland, we've been working quite hard to build a neutrality movement. And both Joseph and DJ mentioned neutrality. In Ireland, neutrality comes very much from a stance that we do not want to be involved in imperialist wars, and it is an anti-imperialist stance. Often people think of neutrality as simply doing nothing and standing back, and particularly in relation to Palestine, they say, oh, well, how can you be neutral? It's not about, that's not what we mean by being neutral. It's about being neutral in imperialist wars. It's about saying we do not want to participate in a war. For example, here we've mentioned the China-US, potential China-US war coming down the line. Neutrality is a viable alternative. There's a legal basis for neutrality in international law. There are examples where neutrality has worked really well. In fact, Ukraine as a neutral country was much safer than Ukraine when it started to ally itself with NATO. And now look where we are. So I think that maybe in the discussion we can get into connecting the dots between how we can talk about neutrality, both in Ireland, for example, in Europe, but also in the Philippines as a viable option to push forward as a way of saying no to war and yes to peace. Maybe I'll just finish with one last comment on Palestine. Anas al-Sharif was one of the journalists who was killed last night. And his very last words before he was killed within a few hours of posting on Twitter. His very last words before he was killed in a targeted attack where silence is complicity. So we cannot be silent in the face of genocide. We cannot be silent in the face of the US war machine. We have to be clear. What's happening in Gaza is not just about Gaza. It's about the kind of world we want to live in. And it's about us saying that we do not want to live in a world where it's okay to take out 5 journalists who are in a tent and then we carry on as normal, where it's okay to kill people who are starving to death and who are trying to look for food and we kill them as they're doing that. So this is about us thinking about the kind of world we want to live in, and the world that we do not want to live in is what we're seeing right now in Gaza. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Are we feeling depressed? Angry? Aroused? Hardly breathe. Thank you, Niamh. Now we go to Brid, our last speaker. Brid is no stranger to the Philippines. Oh, by the way, this is Niamh's first visit, isn't it, to the Philippines? And I hope you in spite of what you've heard today, you leave with some good impressions of the people. Anyway, at least. Okay. So we'd like to hear now from Brid. So Brid, as I said, is no stranger to the Philippines. She's married to a Filipino for 40 years. Actually, they're celebrating their 40th anniversary this year. Congratulations, Brid. Yeah, congratulations. So Brid is the coordinator of the Corporate Power Project of TNI and within the Economic Justice Program. As I said, TNI is based in Amsterdam. Brid is a political educator, a political activist, and her work focuses on the role of TNCs in the economy and politics in the context of globalization. Her interests, and actually she draws also from the perspective of the social, feminist, anti-racist, migrant, and refugee movements as crucial agents of transformative change. She's from Ireland, like Niamh, and she holds a BA in literature and postgraduate degree in education from the University of Ireland, and master's in women's studies from the University of Westminster. So Brid has been in and out of the country, but actually for the past 3 months, they have practically been based in Samar, because Nonoy has been involved with the fisher folks organization that is also celebrating its anniversary. Yes, you have had a celebration already. Yeah, just celebrated its 40th year of existence. So now we'd like to listen to Brid. I hope it's not going to be more depressive.
Thank you very much, Princess, and thanks to my co-panelists. It's always, yeah, and it's a real privilege to have. Well, I'll try to be really short because I'm hoping maybe at the end we will have some concluding remarks on what we can all do together, no, in the face of this rather. Yeah, well, I think we can take a more dialectical look at how the world is today. No, there are many reasons to be extremely pessimistic, and we need to be very realistic. The threat of war is not simply words. It's very, very real, as we have seen from all of the data that was put before us this afternoon, from Dulce, from Joseph, from Niamh. That we don't develop weapons just to keep them in the cupboard and to sort of, be like to show off our silverware or our trophies. No, we develop weapons to make war. No. So what I would like to do is just make a few very short comments complementary to what's been said. One in relation to the European Union, a few short remarks also in relation to migration, and maybe initially some comments linking to what Joseph has been saying about the need to look for, look back and look forward to new horizons, no, in terms of our possibilities. So in relation to the European, maybe also just a personal note, I really would like to give, I couldn't know maybe exactly how to articulate the tremendous contribution globally of the Philippine movement in its many aspects, ever since the beginning of the 19th century until now, in terms of exposing the reality of the US. I think we cannot say that loud enough and strong enough, and I think it needs to be very much reclaimed very proudly by the new generation of Filipinos. No, I mean my own politicization began also from initiatives at the beginning of the century, because no more than Philippines, Ireland has had a long history of anti-imperialist struggle, and the reason that today we still defend that Ireland can and must be neutral in terms of military alliances, it dates back to the 1913 anti-conscription movement, and a movement that said neither Kaiser, so not Germany, nor the British, will we fight imperialist wars. And what that movement was really, in ways, the mother still of the movement we have today, and the long struggle also we've had to assert our independence within the European Union. This has been very crucial. So in a way, my own sort of articulation in terms of understanding the more global need for an anti-imperialist movement, really, I was so fortunate to find myself in the Philippines in December of 1968, no other place than on the edge of the base in Olongapo City. So within, I would say, 2 months, I knew, of course, about the Vietnam War. We all did at that stage, all the kids of the 60s, but really seeing it in action with practice bombing over the city, I was teaching, you couldn't hear yourself thinking, never mind teaching in that context, no? So maybe what I just want to say is that yeah, we're in a kind of lean times in relation to our strategy as movements and where to go and what to name and how to go about it. But we do really have to review our history and the lessons, the valid lessons that will shape the future. I think it's very important. In relation to Europe, I mean, I of course completely support what Niamh has been saying. I think the Europe of today is a militarized economic and political entity, undemocratic and very aggressive. Aggressive, you could see what Joseph said in terms of trade, critical minerals. Critical minerals is wherever it is, and it's what it's doing in relation to Africa, what it will be, and what it's doing also in relation to Latin America and Asia has to be very much in the forefront of our thinking. But we have another very big challenge in handling Europe. I think about 25 years ago, I can't think exactly the year, we had a marvelous conference here on East Timor in this very building. And in that conference, you know, there was still a lot of, I would say, maybe a bit of mythology about the European Union. At least we had East Timor to show that Portugal certainly didn't handle its decolonization of Timor in the way it should have, responsibly. I mean, this reminded everyone that colonization also from the European Union was still ongoing. The French in the nuclear testing in the Pacific, this time, so there was space to actually call out Europe. What we see, Europe, the Europe we know today, as Niamh said, emerged from the ashes of the so-called the Second World War. But the Second World War is usually determined, is usually spoken of in terms of the struggle against fascism. It was a struggle against fascism, but it was a struggle for transformative relations of social justice within Europe. And the fact that in the end, the treaty that ended the war created, of course, a division of Europe. Today, we are seeing that unravel. I mean, Europe has been extremely aggressive in relation to the expansion of NATO into, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also the Warsaw Pact. The agreement was that the status quo, if you like, of non-expansion of NATO would be respected, but this is not the case, no? I mean, we see what's been happening. And of course, we can all have our analysis on how Putin's leadership is handling this situation. But we have to look at the bigger picture. The reason that we had a social democratic system in Europe, so meaning there was real improvement for workers in Europe after the war, because they played a huge role in the war. And they made their governments responsible. I mean, Nona and I have lived in a house in Utrecht that was the first houses built after the war for the railway workers. So but the reality was this could be enforced because you had a different system over the border. And Europe itself, the capitalists of Europe, were under pressure. However, the initiation of the European Union came from the coal and steel community. Carried forward by Germany, France, Netherlands, Benelux, Italy, as an initial, it was only a group of 6 or 7 countries in the initial, then it grew wider and wider until now you can hardly live on the continent of Europe and not be part of the EU, or be part and be part of the NATO alliance, as Niamh said. I mean, the only other member of the European Union who is not a member of NATO is Austria. Though now there's a lot of jiggling about that. But why? Because the Soviet Union made an agreement with the other countries in the Allies in Europe that they would withdraw from Austria and Vienna. And until now, at least, they have kept that agreement. But this aspects of the construction of Europe are really, yeah, they're very much smoothed over by a kind of what we have to call out really a very I would say that one of the biggest challenges we have about Europe, and maybe I leave it at that, is actually reclaiming a narrative in relation to Europe. Europe has been much better than the US actually at false narratives about, you know, the European flagship of democracy, the European flagship of social democracy, and so on. And we can see that in the last 2 decades, especially with the consolidation of the European Union, the whole initiative really of a more democratic, more people-centered Europe has been buried, almost really buried maybe. So I think one of our biggest challenges is how will we deal with the narrative of Europe and the narrative that's proposed in how it's conducting its foreign relations. No? I give you just a few examples of the contradictions. One especially in relation to aid, but also the trade agenda of Europe in Asia and Africa has been extremely aggressive, and I think Joseph called that out very well. And on the other hand, in relation to some very significant treaties, Europe has always claimed a space of exceptionalism. So in the work that some organizations here we've been doing in Geneva on a treaty to regulate transnational corporations, Europe until now is saying it actually acts like this in front of its own 28 sovereign countries. It will sit in the room. It has designated its responsibilities and any comments it makes to an agency. Okay, it's one of those undemocratic constructions of the European Union, the external affairs agency, and they will sit in the room and say, well, first of all, they didn't want to be there. The second step, yes, we are here, but we are not negotiating. So the 28 sovereign states will sit in that room in the plenary of the United Nations Human Rights Council. When it comes to corporations, they will never be a part of it. They will never be a part of it. So we have a very big task to expose that. And then I will say, in relation to migration, and Niamh dealt with it, like a very strong defense for further expansion of the armaments of Europe and arming of the militarization of the borders. This has been going on really for 20 years with organizations like State Watch and others that we've worked with, and the migrants themselves making expose of this. Now they have, the whole so-called defense of Europe is being contracted out to, especially to states in Africa, where trade and access to investment is very much tied to the fact of what role they are willing to play in defending the Europe empire. There's no sort of even camouflage about that anymore. No. So countries like Tunisia, Morocco, Rwanda was mentioned. I mean, there's incredible pressure on European on states of being this. I don't know how you would really describe it, but being in a way the aggressive defense of hunting and preventing and causing thousands of migrants on the move to die in the deserts of Africa and in the Mediterranean Sea. A major sort of step in that direction has been the EU Pact, which was introduced in 2020, the EU Pact has been very much fashioned on where Europe also played a major role in terms of in a way, marginalizing, I think the Philippines and the Philippine movements played a very important role in the Convention on the Rights of Migrants. This has been basically completely marginalized over like a 7-year period of campaigning within the UN to kind of downgrade. I mean, the international treaty on the rights of migrants and of refugees is no longer the operative policy. What we have now are compacts, gentlemen's agreements about management of both migrants and refugees. And this has a huge impact on, the war, what is literally a war on migrants and refugees. Again, the European Union played an important role in it, and now they have their own version of the pact. This, I think, is an important element, not just for the organizations that defend the rights of migrants, but really for the economic and other political movements here in Philippines to actually seriously look at the question of the Philippine migrant labor in the context of the global restructuring of labor, which made the neoliberal globalization possible, actually. And I think this is a new angle that we need to pay a lot more attention to in research. And my final point, which I hope will come back in the conversation, is what can we do about this situation? No? Well, I think there are lots of things that we can do. I mean, we had many proposals already from Dulce and from Joseph in terms of Philippines. At TNI, for example, where we work on these issues mainly maybe from a global perspective, but actually very much in conjunction with national movements. So those of us who are Europeans within the European Union, within TNI, very much take the responsibility of calling out the European Union in its complicity, centering the struggle of Palestine. I think this is a crucial, is the crucial expose of what we mean when we talk about the US, Europe, imperialism of the 2025 year, where maybe in the Philippines in the late 60s and early 70s, the student movement was very astute here in having very handy slogans like, we never talked about Marcos without mentioning the US Marcos dictatorship. I think today, Palestine is very much clarifying for us that what we are dealing with is the US, EU, Netanyahu dictatorship and genocide of the Palestinian people. And therefore, it has so many links in terms of complicity. And in a way, we are all somehow complicit, but we can do something about it. And I would like to have a more opportunity to talk about that with yourselves, including maybe a fresh look at the urgent need for Global South, both movements and governments to be more in touch with each other and finding an answer. Thank you very much.
Brid, and to all our speakers. Now we'd like to listen to reactions or comments coming from our participants, our guests here. This is a roundtable discussion. We've heard the speakers give us the situation in both regions, the world, so distressing, as we all have heard. So how do we go forward? How do we get out of this trap of war efforts in both our regions? So who would like to do the first comments around the room? I know it's almost like really we're all stunned and angry, and we all know that Gaza, the bombardment of Palestine and Gaza continues to this day. We just heard of the death of journalists. So it's really a genocide. I think the earlier that international organizations can accept that this is a genocide, I don't know, there's still a lot of quibbling whether this is genocide or not. But for ordinary people, with all the newspaper news reports that we get, we cannot, it's just unfathomable that when hundreds of thousands have already been killed, maimed, and dislocated, and maimed for life, I think there's no other word for it than genocide. So we'd like to hear from reactions around the floor. Anyone who would like to start? Young people? You have the word to what? They will be inhabiting this world longer than some of us. So how do you feel about what you have heard from the young people and the older people? Wala. Are we all stunned by what we have heard? We like to start. Thank you. And can you just introduce yourself, your name?
Hello. Hello, thank you for your presentations. My question is about first I would like to comment because my major is in German, so I am interested in German history, politics and policy in Asia. So recently, in the news, on July 11, the Strat Base is also a think tank, hosted a dialogue or a big event on Makati Hotel on the night here of the arbitral victory, defending the rules-based order to reinforce defense capabilities and partnerships. And they invited several foreign envoy from Australia, British, Canada, France, Germany, India, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, USA, and Vietnam. And then recently, Gibo Teodoro also visited Germany for a it said it's a milestone for the Philippines and Germany to have agree to develop comprehensive framework to enhance their defense partnership. No. So it was a peacekeeping ministerial event in Berlin, Germany, held on May 13 and 14, 2025. So my question is this the effort of Germany to extend their economic and military activities, the Indo-Pacific, and also to regain their economic crisis on their country? So that's my first question. And my second question is, what are your opinion about the rise of the far right movement all over the Europe? Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I'm Ricky from European Language Department.
Hi, Ricky. Thank you for that question. Actually, I don't know if you monitored, but the Philippines is actually in negotiations with a bunch of countries for VFA types of agreements. So as of now, we all know that we have the visiting force agreement between the US and the Philippines. We now have a VFA type agreement with Japan. It's called the Reciprocal Access Agreement. And we now have an previously 2014, if I'm not mistaken, we already have a VFA type. It's called Status of Visiting Force Agreement with Australia, and the latest edition is SOVFA Status of Visiting Forces Agreement with New Zealand. We actually have in the pipeline, and this I think this was like revealed 2023, around 19 or so countries, including European countries like Germany, France, Canada, the UK. So I actually with India also, and I think that was recently signed. We had like a defense factor and some cooperation with India that was recently in the news. I think it's both ways. It's consistent with what the government has described as what was the famous quote in 2022 when said, "We are a friend to all and an enemy to none." But unfortunately, when you look at the bigger picture, it actually aligns with a certain global power. All of the agreements we're doing is aligned with a certain global power. And that's why our branding is we are considered a major non-NATO ally in this region. We won't get that brand if we didn't have that unique place in the cog of the global geopolitical reality at this point.
Maybe I'll take then the second part on Germany. I mean, Germany is a fascist state. It's very clear in the way that Germany has behaved since the 7th of October that it is fascist in the way it has policed Palestinian protest. It picks people off the street simply because they're wearing symbols in solidarity with Palestine. For example, if this event were taking place in Germany, it could very well be stormed by the police and shut down. And we've seen various instances in Germany where the police have stormed universities, have stormed, peaceful gatherings of people who are discussing Palestine, and they've been, detained and arrested and taken away. We've seen Germany enact bans against people so they can't actually enter Germany. That has happened to a number of high-profile speakers where they've not been allowed into the country. There was a particular case of a doctor, Dr. Abu Sita, who spent a number of months in Gaza at the beginning of the genocide, and when he was invited to speak in Germany, they invoked a Schengen-wide ban on him, meaning he couldn't go into Schengen in any way, shape, or form. He challenged that in the courts. But they have actively kept voices out of and silenced voices in Germany. They've made laws now whereby if you were to become a German citizen through having lived there for a number of years, you have to swear allegiance to Israel. So to become a citizen of Germany, you have to recognize the raison d'être, the reason of being of the German state is to protect Israel. This is written into German law. They're in the process of deporting Irish citizens, which is a violation of EU law, but they're in the process of deporting Irish citizens who were supporting Palestinian solidarity. They were arrested and now they're trying to deport them. The German foreign minister from the previous government, Annalena Baerbock, is on record saying that it is fine to kill children. Maybe some of you will remember this, but in the context of the bombing in Lebanon, she said that there are times when it is permissible to kill children under international law. There are none. It is never permissible under international law to kill children. The German foreign minister at the time said it was. Chancellor Merz said recently that when Israel was bombing Iran, it's doing our dirty work. Now, Israel was illegally bombing Iran, but again, so basically Germany has its Nazi past, And it is now rolling out a new wave of Nazism by getting behind Israel, because what Israel is doing is a Holocaust. There's no other word for what's going on in Gaza right now. It is a Holocaust against the people of Gaza. We have over 2 million people in a concentration camp, effectively. They're even calling it a concentration zone. And Germany is right up there with them as they perpetrate that. It is a NATO-led genocide. Even before the 7th of October, at the very end of September, actually, before the 7th of October attack, you had a mission from NATO where one of NATO's top admirals traveled to the perimeter fence separating Gaza from Israel to inspect the state of the fence, the fence that was separating Gaza and Israel. So this has long been a NATO-led project, and Germany is, of course, one of the main partners in that.
Maybe just very briefly, I mean, we know that the UK, France, and Germany are involved in NATO operations in the Pacific. And I think this is one of the issues that maybe we need to look into much more thoroughly, both from the Europe side, but also here in, as you are developing your own strategies about how, you know, the question about, the geopolitics of the region are developing. I think it's really very important. Also to say that what we are seeing in Europe maybe is the post-World War II brought a certain, if you like, I was going to say, it brought a certain equilibrium in the sense that a major agreement among the capitalists of Europe that they could work together, and therefore the whole project developing the European Union became a major focus. How that could be in terms of the balance of interests of European capital. So that time, steel and coal being at the center of it. However, and then that was within the umbrella of the relationship with US. So you had a mutual agreement in a sense, and the European corporate world was allowed in a way to have its own special development. You know, also the big flagships of the European post-World War II were allowed a lot of space to develop their particular expertise. If you take Philips, if you take some also of the how the steel companies, even the German companies who were part of the genocide at that time, Siemens and all that, were allowed a new era of development in cooperation in a way with the US. However, that is completely unraveling. There is now, we're in an era where there is huge competition, and in a way, I suppose Trump has called it out. And what we are witnessing is, I think those of you who are both economists, but also maybe looking at the geopolitical collapse of the post-World War II multilateralism, should read though it's a lot of it is in Spanish, but there's he was an analyst. He's also a very strong ecologist, Ramon Duran Fernandez, and he died a few years ago. But his book, one of his last big contributions was what he was calling the breakdown of global capitalism, which eventually would see the contradiction again emerging between the US and Europe. And also he foresaw the years between 2000 and 2030 as a crucial moment for seeing what could happen in terms of the resurgence of militarization, also fascism. And I recommend it. We did publish it with Corporate Europe Observatory, that but it's well worth putting this bigger context around what we are seeing in the breakdown of global capitalism and how they are both prepared to defend it.
Last point ko lang. By the way, this year, also the commemoration of the 70th Philippine-Germany bilateral relation. And part of these activities, Philippine would be the guest of honor in the upcoming Frankfurt Book Fair, no, this October. So there was a ongoing call and series of dialogue to boycott that Frankfurt Book Fair because of the Germany's support on the war on Gaza. However, 3 days ago, I read on the news that MERS want to halt the what do you call this, to export the arms used in Gaza. Is it? Thank you.
Yeah, so what happened a few days ago was Mirth said that they would halt going forward any future licenses. That means they will continue to export weapons under the licenses that currently exist. They will continue to arm the genocide.
Marvin?
No.
Next thing, the US depends on import. While the world depends on the dollar as a reserve. So the way it's done, you want to keep it, not the dollar. But to hit the US trade among you. So you have BRICS. They can because you have the African nation. But what the hell they do? They're not doing it. They are giving you all kinds of things dominate. Alam mo natin yung katatahan ng Amerika. 30 years ago, binenta nila yung rare earth technology. Kanino? So now they depend on China. Now they reduce the salvage mining para makakulot ng rare earth. So there, agricultural policy, year in, year out, they have the US Farm Bill. What is the US Farm Bill? It's nothing else but a big subsidy bill. When US why are you doing that year in and year out? Pumping your farmers to the detriment of the farmers all over the world. Walang sagot. Now you have to crop. It's bound to be assessed. Psychiatrically, the next few days. Healing. Have you seen it in black and white? Nothing. Only pronouncement from Trump. Your president to take go to fight. Marco, saying that the 1% reduction in traffic is a big deal. Bigabang ka pa. Yan. Wala akong 89 to 18. It hasn't changed. Now, problema natin, worldwide is that yan. Ginagawa ko sa kanila. At masaya pa ang presidente. So how can we start? Yung oligarchs mo, you should be supporting yung certain issues na operable sa kanila. Hindi na ginagawa. Kasi alam mo na, pag may accommodations sa Amerika, titignan na. But for us, ordinary citizens, what gain do we get? Nothing. Entire point. Any discussion about the use of here, but reinstituting autarky. Balik na naman tayo sa panahon. Sino lagi yung Pilipinas na ako? Sige yung pizza.
Yeah, ganito, from Social Watch, maiba naman ako because meron challenge on what is to be done. So I remember back then when we were young boys and girls, we set up that Palestinian support group because we know that it has been a continuing struggle and we want to return the gesture because the Philippine movement during the anti-dictatorship movement had a lot of support and solidarity coming from Europe, coming from the US, coming from Japan and Australia. And we thought that, yes, we should return the gesture by way of, doing solidarity work. And of course, see Princess for Cuban solidarity was also, a good learning, especially for the youth. And Brid, you mentioned about Timor-Leste, no? And I think the Philippines really contributed a lot. Many of us have been involved in the solidarity movement for Timor-Leste, sending delegates to that country. And even now, it's been a good bonding between Timor-Leste people and also Filipino people. And I remember one time, this gang of Niamh and Brid, oh, you should meet this person from Portugal who used to head Brennan, no, Agito. And of course, history went, the other way, but still, colleagues from his colleagues, Horta and Princess, you hosted Shanana at one point at the executive house. Yeah, I remember, and they're still very active. He's actually the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste, and Jose Horta is President of Timor-Leste. I have to meet one of the ministers of Timor-Leste, and this is especially for the youth sector, because I said, oh, I met your Prime Minister, and also the exiled former President of Timor-Leste, Abilio, who's now based in Germany, in Portugal. And the minister said, oh, I wasn't born yet because he was in his mid-40s. And so we thought that, hey, I mean, from the, youth sector, probably you can, learn something, a little something from the solidarity work these people have done. And we in Social Watch, I think especially was thinking about, we should be able to develop a people-to-people solidarity movement in Asia Pacific, together with, in support coming from developed countries of Europe and the US, because, the people of Asia, now, Indonesia, they're all for peace. They don't want war, but they want development that is genuine. So probably if we can also develop that kind of people's peace and development movement, I know we had that in the 80s and early 90s, it's the Asia Pacific movement for peace and development. And we were able to bring hundreds of peacekeepers coming from Australia, New Zealand, Japan, India, Malaysia, and so on. And that was really a great moment, challenging US military exercise. That was one of the and so I think we have to look forward and see those visions.
So I agree with what Rene said. So I agree with what Rene said. The need to build a Philippine and a regional platform for an independent, well, for an independent foreign policy and for a people-to-people kind of exchange that we build a broad peace constituency. I'd also like to add to some of the points mentioned by some of our speakers. When Brid was talking about that relative peace that reigned in Europe after the World War II. I was not just in Europe, in the Western world, if you like, while they were doing wars in other parts of the world. It was relatively peaceful back home. I think that unraveling of that moment, I think we also need to bring in the fact that what we are now seeing is a takeover of the deep state. And when I talk about the deep state, and this is I'm talking about the military industrial complex, the State Department, CIA, M16. We used to think of them as conspiratorial entities that are moving in the background, and we don't know how real that is. Apparently, it is forces like this that I think have taken and are determining, have captured political power. And many of our leaders today are actually at the dictate of the deep state. And I think we have to put that issue front and center. We need a real discussion on what the deep state is and how it operates in our respective countries, in our respective regions, because it's very real and the deep state is operating in the Philippines. They have their interlocutors, both internationally and domestically. And I think that our friends from the English department, the many fora, European department, Vicky, there are many forums
that are being organized. And I think that the interlocutors of the deep state are behind those fora. Because the other thing that we need to talk about is not just the manufacture of military personnel. We have to talk about the manufacture of consent, which is being propagated and used by mainstream media, is being used to create a public opinion that makes war tenable. I don't, Fidel's telling me to mention some of these interlocutors who we know, no? Kaya lang we might be recorded and might get libel. But I think that this is very serious because even in the Philippine movement, I think that there is some division. There is some division because the deep state has penetrated, quite frankly. And they have been legitimized. Some of them look so innocuous, they look so friendly, and they, in fact, even terms around human rights, democracy have been weaponized by the deep state against peace, against independent movement, against national sovereignty. We need to have a hard conversation about this because it is unfolding right now. I think that one of the broad rubric of what we are talking about is really, in terms of the big archetypal frameworks, is really, the tension between US Western hegemony, which is wanting to retain its reign with an emerging multipolar world. And because they are losing control, they are rebalancing, in their grasping kind of way, how to maintain that dominance. And so, following by what Renee is saying and what Marvin is saying, is how do we build the alternative platforms, not just both in terms of narratives and in terms of building a constituency, so that we're able to challenge. And there are many. You were talking about speakers. We have many resource persons. We have many networks whom I think we should build linkages with. And then finally, yung discussion on economic statecraft. I very much appreciated how you brought that in. But I think we need to, because when you talk about state intervention in the economy, that could be seen as industrial policy, which is what developing countries need. So how do we further nuance that so that the point that Joseph really wanted to focus on is so that industrial policy, because industrial policy we like, and that's the state. We want the state intervening to support domestic industries together with other actors. But I think Joseph was mentioning a more insidious type of intervention itself. I just wanted to nuance that a bit. Yun lang.
Regarding the others topics. I've attended other fora and discussions on the same topic. And often there was reference to the non-aligned movement and neutrality, especially now that we are celebrating the Bandung, the spirit of Bandung. And I wonder, given all that
have been said this afternoon, what really are the prospects of building a non-aligned movement at this point in history? And what is the status of the existing non-aligned movement that was built years ago? So that's one question. The second question is for the activists who have been around for some time since the 1960s, 70s. Can you share with us what is the difference in the context of the Cold War or post-World War II political situation when even after the war, there was always threat of war. And the situation today when we all feel that there is a brewing war globally. So what's difference? What are the new elements? So yeah.
Does anyone want to answer these questions first or listen to some more?
Yeah, just very quickly interject on the neutrality. Can I? Yeah. Okay. There is actually an initiative now. It was launched June, in time for the Talisman Saber exercises, which was July 13 to August 4, of the Peace Pacific Network, of a petition pushing for neutrality in Asia. So I would understand that there is quite some traction in that regard. Of course, it's a different thing how far how far-reaching it could be, because there has at that time there is like some technical problems we can get on board for the Pacific Islanders, because it was like a Zoom. It was a combination of a Zoom launch and in person. So they had like issues on how the Pacific Islanders can get on board, but they did send messages. And this petition has been going around since June. Although as of now, I don't have the numbers on how the extent of by which it has gained, but in that launching, they had quite a few of peace networks and so on. And also one of the big networks that was behind it is also, aside from the Peace Pacific Network, is World Beyond War and the International Peace Bureau.
Yes. Speak louder. Speak louder.
Hello. We have a stop the war coalition, which we will revive during the Palestinian with the local Palestinian issue. So maybe everybody can go and join us. Minsan, KPD is the one at the Secretariat. So we started it last year, provinces. So maybe it's one coalition where everybody, I think all the blocks are participating, because we tried one for a joint mobilization on the Palestinian issue. And so we have decided that stop the war coalition to be the moving structure. Yeah, open for everybody. And that I think the students who would like to join, especially the young people. Kasi hindi na kami pwede. At marcha-marcha lang. Ano lang kami batasan. Hindi na pwede. These discussions are very important. But what I would like to call on everybody here is that so far, no, even the top of the
Is there anybody else who would like to talk, uh, react, or give comments? Yes, no.
I just want to also to share something. That's almost asking questions, but to share, especially after listening the situation from, of course, from the Europe side, but actually, it is global, especially the state of war that is now engulfing the whole world. First, I am from Europe. I've been there more than 30 years, and I've been working on the ground on migrant communities and refugees. So I want to share that, especially on the point of what Brid said in relation to Europe. Europe has European Pact, so-called European Pact, and this pact is supposed to be actually very assistant and working for the good of the migrants and refugee peoples. But the reality is, on the ground, this European Pact is actually anti-migrants and anti-refugees. And so essentially, it's actually against the human rights of migrants and refugees. That's why I wanted to share it with you in the Philippines, because I'm also Filipino, to share it. And then in relation to what we should do with the new world realities, especially because of the essence of war and the continuing of war, and we have used here especially the example of Palestine as continued killings, genocide, and also journalists and people. And what is important here in the reality is it's not just a genocide. It is actually the whole thing has reached the oppressiveness of the structure, has reached to the point of impunity. And if we analyze, actually, it's not only the killings of Palestinians that is going on in Palestine, but I think the main purpose is really to annihilate the Palestinian. In fact, that to allow them to become human beings, but or to become even a state. And I think this is very important. So there is a need, as Derek said, there is a need a new kind of solidarity that will answer to this solidarity. And this solidarity would mean to really change ourselves, we the activists, and those working for the people. And even our going to the people, we should also change. And so we have to get out of our own different ways of trying for change, different silos, and get together in the new form of convergence. And as we have reviewed, like, for example, the example of the Bandung Conference, probably what we need now is to also, even within the Philippines itself, and of course in Asia, to come to a kind of new front, the front of the global South that is being oppressed by the structure from the beginning up to now. It continued. So a new global South front, and I think it is a challenge, and not only for us here on this hall, but also for the whole Philippines and for the whole world. Thank you very much.
Who's that?
Just came from another meeting before coming over. And this meeting was in preparation for the Asia Pacific Social Forum, which is going to take place in November 1 to 5. So this was just a preparatory in times they're trying to build solidarity among the Southeast Asian countries. If we have a European Union, we'll come up with our own social Asia Pacific forums. So we hope to get the how do you call this, to pass on the information after, so you can get your email addresses, because there will be more meetings in preparation. Now, Irene was also there, and yes, now we hope to bring together the different countries, Southeast Asia, for solidarity and to act on this war situation.
Thank you for all those who have given their reactions and comments. The challenge is still daunting. I think this is not, it cannot be the end of this discussion, because the threat is there, and things are still so bad, and we still have to do some more work. We are challenged. We are doing everything, I think, but the point is there anything can we do better, and in what way? Because we have a coalition, and we all decided that we have this Stop the War coalition here in the Philippines. It has been revived, but we need to reach out to more people, because there are still a lack of awareness of the interconnection of issues. It's not simply now just war and militarization. We've just heard how trade, investment in the economy, and politics and militarization have all been combined. But it seems that the dominant paradigm has been a militarized outlook, a militarized strategy. So on one hand, while there are war, conflicts in different parts of the world. But the way the world, the way the world economy and our local economies are organized, it's a slow death for everyone, especially for the marginalized and the poor people in our own countries. So whether it is a war situation or whether it's we seem to be, you know, in a more peaceful situation, but the way our economies are structured, politicized and militarized, connected with military security issues, it will be a slow death for everyone, for the whole population. There are, I don't know if we still have some other reactions. Yes, but there are certain words that have issues that have been mentioned. The deep state, I think that Marivic talks about. This is a term that has come about more recently, you know, with the Trump ascendancy of Trump. But the nefarious, insidious activities have been going over the years. It's nothing new, but it's just that it's become more serious and more invasive and more and more aggressive. So, but now we would like to hear from our speakers. You have stimulated us. It seems depressing, but we have to get out of our depression and we have to act while it can be, you know, we're all stunned in a way, but we have to get out of it and see the opportunities and the openings that there are and where we can move forward together, not in isolation. Okay, can we hear from each one?
I think the last point of Princess is the crucial one, no? That we're looking at a lot of convergences among different movements. And that is a challenge in the Philippine context in the sense, if you are imagining a one unified movement, right? But I think we can have a convergence of analysis, a common understanding of what's happening, a common identification of what the strategic issues and challenges are. And I think one approach can be that we attack at multiple fronts. Because there are many fronts of this battle. I hate to use a military term, but we need to confront a lot of issues. And we can push for a strategy of common strategy of building a big network to confront all of these issues, or we can work in a coordinated fashion so that the different groups can focus, can zero in on a particular front. So for example, there's been talk about states, but let's not forget the corporate interests that are pushing for this trade, economic expansion, and military expansion. So on that front, I think it's important to, as Brid mentioned, there's a campaign, a global campaign to dismantle corporate power. And the space for that is in the United Nations Human Rights Council. There's a negotiation for a legally binding instrument on PNCs. That can be one front in trying to secure greater corporate accountability. Related to that, I think if people have not read yet this report from Francesca Albanese of the Special Rapporteur on Palestine, right? Her latest report, From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide, underpins this not just the complicity, but the central role played by corporations in perpetuating the genocide in Palestine. So I think for those working on issue of that's an area that we can continue to focus on. I think Palestine is another area where we see a lot of these convergences. It's a microcosm of all of these convergences, whether you're talking of corporate accountability, the push for the push for war, the expansion of militarism. In all of these, I think for Filipino movements, the key question is, what is the role played by the Philippine government? How complicit is the Philippine government in pushing the genocide in Palestine? So there, I think we need to look into the relationship of the Philippines with Israel, the kind of trade, including military trade deals that are happening. And in all of these, we need to push back. So that's all we can do, is to identify the different areas, the different fronts, and attempt to push back slowly, even if we are, and not be overwhelmed, no, by the big challenges and issues that confront us. So we are looking at the new manifestations of capital and empire. I think that's what we're seeing. And we're looking at, for example, the rise of what is called broligarchy, right? Broligarchy, the oligarchy, but specifically big tech, the male-dominated big tech agenda, no? So I think that, again, is another of those fronts that we need to face, no? And part of that strategy is to understand, unpack, build constituencies, resist. So I think that's, we need to, in order to be not to be overwhelmed, I think it's a combination of focusing on specific areas, but at the same time, linking and coordinating with the other movements.
Hello. Yeah, so just a final word. Let us remember that host nations are the first to burn in any war. And we've been hosting, one of our colleagues here already said, we've been hosting it since after World War II, no? US bases in particular. But let me just say that, let me take off from one of the ideas that has been raised. We really need to challenge, one, the information that's coming out, because the presentation that I presented was as a result of so many research man-hours trying to get it together, trying to put it together, because there has been a dearth of information on what's going on. And I think we need to not just expand our constituency, but rather rethink the narratives we're putting forward. It's true that we're always talking about the dire. Why not talk about the alternative to take off from what we want it to happen? So, for instance, the Subic Ammo Depot is a clear target at this point. Maybe we need to get together and talk about how feasible is this? Is it really going to be for the Filipinos? I don't think so. It's going to be for US ammo manufacturers, I bet. Even that Davao refueling facility that the US embassy came out with it's a call for investors. It's a call for investors. Aren't we going to monitor that? Do we have networks that can monitor those things? Maybe we need help in those regard, because information now at this juncture where narratives is the war is going to be our power. And we've proven it time and again, our strength. Even if we're so different and even if we're so many in the Philippines, is we can get the information and we can get the people together. So maybe it's not going to be, our struggle won't be like the before. It might be more creative. It might be, more messages coming in. It might have more angles built into it. because we really need to get our youth on board. Because as you know, surveys are saying that there's that line of racism underneath with this issue, like, you know, the anti-China sentiment is there. And the linchpin of the argument is that the security, national security argument is the argument that we need to really get down and challenge. It's like, why do we need this? What is the basis for the basis? We need to answer that question in so many ways. And at the same time, trying to connect it with what is happening across other countries. Like, why are we at the time of genocide? Why is our government signing deals with Israel? Actually, I don't know if you noticed that we did sign a couple of deals with Israel, you know, just recent months. Maybe we should hold off on, you know, should hold off on things like this. And then maybe another opportunity or platform would be, because the Philippines will be hosting 2026 ASEAN. Although we know that, you know, if you're the host country, you don't really want to rock the boat. But maybe for civil society, that could be a platform that we could think about, work on together and highlight what could be possibilities of what we want our foreign policy to look like vis-a-vis our real national security. Thank you.
Okay, maybe just two things then to wrap up. I suppose maybe the first thing, because we're in a university, it's really important to mention, I think, the role of students. In Europe and in the US, there's been a lot of attention on the student movement, in particular, and pressuring their universities to cut ties with Israel, with Israeli institutions. And this goes, I think, to what Joseph said about the economy of genocide. How do you cut ties with that, the economy of genocide? So I think maybe for the students in the room and for the student movement, is there a BDS or a boycott, divest, sanction movement here in the university? If not, can one be set up? Looking at the companies, for example, you know, if the university doesn't have direct ties with Israeli institutions, what companies is the university working with in terms of catering, for example? Are you using Coca-Cola in your university? Are there, you know, is Coca-Cola available? Can you try and break that contract because Coca-Cola gives Coca-Cola products to the Israeli army? Are you using McDonald's in your university because McDonald's is feeding Israeli soldiers? Are you buying Starbucks coffees? So all of these things that we need to look at in our individual lives, but also on a contractual level with where we can put pressure. So is there a BDS movement on campus? And if not, why not? Almost 2 years into a genocide, and how can they be more active in pushing for a BDS strategy within the university? And then maybe just on broadening out from the actions that you can take beyond the university on the question of neutrality, we have no choice but to build a neutrality movement, because the alternative is war. And as things stand today, we're barreling down the road of a war between the US and China, and the Philippines will be caught in the middle of that. So we have no choice. We have to build a neutrality movement where the Philippines, as much as Ireland, as much of many other countries around the world, will very forcefully say, we want this as our alternative to war. Often when we look at neutrality, I think there's two things that are worth mentioning. Nobody makes money from neutrality. It's not a profitable position to hold, to be a neutral country, in that there's so much money at stake when you're looking at arms and all of the profits. Again, going to what Joseph said about the economy of genocide, there's so much money being made from war. So how do we make it untenable to be making profit from war and push forward neutrality as an alternative? And then the second point on neutrality is it makes warmongers very uncomfortable because it shows that there is a pathway forward to peace. So I think at TNI and also at the International Peace Bureau, we've been doing lots of work on moving forward neutrality as a strategy that has a legal basis in international law to say no to war and yes to peace.
Yeah, just also very briefly, I mean, maybe to address the question about the prospects. Of course, when, and even our sharings here, we can be overwhelmed by the fact that it seems like, on the one hand, yeah, the war drums are beating loudly, the corporate drums are beating loudly, and so on. And this, of course, was very much the product, if you like, and the achievement of globalization. However, I think we're not at all starting from scratch. There has been resistance to every aspect of the neoliberal globalization, whether it was trade, whether it was armaments, whether it was in the field of health, whether it was in the field of the climate. And in that sense, I think Joseph's ideas about, you know, looking at we can look at that two ways. We can say that we've had tremendous fragmentation of movements, and maybe that's, yeah, I mean, maybe that was inevitable in the sense of if you like, the aggression of capital under that globalization phase really brought a lot of division about also the forms of struggle, the ways of struggle. And I think now what's really positive is that we have many fronts of struggle, actually, and struggle that is related to resistance and to real achievements. Because I think actually we have an agenda for a different world. There is more interest, I think, and commitment among people to actually find a pathway, a common pathway towards a world that would be more equal and more just for the majority of people. And I think one of the biggest pluses we have is that despite the rise in the rightist forces, we have much more conviction on the side of ordinary people that phase has not worked. The corporate-led, militarized phase until now has not worked. It has not worked for them in their personal life. So I think finding some commonality, finding a framework that can bring us together is extremely important. I would also say, though, that those of us who live in the global north or who are part of the global north, that we have to very much question, if you like, the notion of solidarity itself. I mean, solidarity, in a sense, the past era of solidarity grew very much out of the anti-colonial struggle. I mean, the people who were really in solidarity were the people of the global south doing their liberation struggle, doing their anti-apartheid struggle, and we were responding to try to make that happen where people were. I think today, maybe we can also take a lesson from the Chilean miners who in 1972 had the following approach to solidarity, which was, we need each other. We cannot, as one nation or one people, solve the big challenge of capital and empire, but we can together do something different. We, as the Chilean miners, we are struggling where we are. You must struggle where you are, and together we will defeat both capital and empire. And I think this is the sort of the political imaginary we need to apply to the question of solidarity. It's not solidarity from the north to the south. Maybe it will be built on a much stronger solidarity between the peoples of the south, because the history, the experience, the achievements have been different. And we will, of course, also learn from that in the north. And one of the things that we are very much confronted with in the European context. Well, two things. I mean, in the face of, excuse me, in the face of the war on migrants, for example, we can count on half fingers of one hand the trade union movements that have come out clearly on that, really. So in that sense, the whole international, the challenge of the labor movement and all of us who are involved in the struggles on migrants and refugees and peoples on the move who are forcibly displaced, we can look at it another way. It's one of the biggest global protests we have today against the failure of globalization, and that we can look at migrant and refugee people as part of the protagonism to dismantle that era that we have lived through. Of course, this requires many different approaches on different levels in the home countries. And I will just go back to Somariga, where we were for a few days, and that gives all of us hope. We had members with this small-scale fishers organization that has been struggling for 15 years to actually tackle the question of livelihood on a small island municipality. And it was really very interesting, the spirit of hope and the idea of capacity, which people feel they have to give to the current challenges. So we can link the local, the global, the local and the national, but also the regional, because really we feel in Europe the absolute failure of the European states in relation to Palestine, for example. But really, we also need in the ASEAN context to really shift gear. There's only one country that has formally taken a position on the Hague Group, and that's Malaysia, in relation to not Vietnam, not yet China, even though China has been very careful about its language. But this is a huge challenge, I think, for not only for the Asian people, but also for the European people. So thank you.
All our speakers this afternoon, I think we are ending on a more hopeful note. While we may have been feeling depressed by what we have heard, but I think what has been stressed here is that we are not starting from scratch. We have a rich experience of resistance that we must continue to improve and to expand. The need again to address our own governments, challenge our own governments to take a more positive position vis-a-vis war situation and conflict situation, and particularly on Gaza and on the economy of our own, within our own countries. We need to continue our internationalism, our solidarity, our people-to-people movements. There are many events that Susan just mentioned, one that is coming up that is focused on migrant issues. So we have to do all of this in more creative ways. And that's how I think we're all ending to be more hopeful than we're midway that we all felt. But thank you everyone for coming to do more homework and other issue of a deep state. They used to think that it only happened in the US, but now it's here, everywhere, and it is in the Philippines. And I don't know why we can't mention names. I think that's part of information sharing, that we need to identify all those deep state, all those spies and okay, so we need to do all that while we continue with our work with more hopeful and creative ways. Thank you, everyone. And this is just the beginning of more discussion.